Thank you, everyone. It's really good to be here. I used to be a parishioner at Our Lady of Lourdes, where Chris and Becca are, and we loved the years that we spent here. We were even part of the team and did our share of retreats and stuff like that. I'm going to be talking about something that I guess you could say for some of you will be preaching to the choir. For others, it'll be new, but for everyone, it will be useful. Okay? And so I kind of want to give a framework for my talk tonight, and that is just getting down to the ultimate question, which is, what is the meaning of life? Now, that's not what I'm going to be talking about specifically tonight, but that's the framework for my talk, right? What is the meaning of life? Well, the Baltimore Catechism has a great answer for that, which many generations have memorized: to know, love, and serve God, and thereby gain heaven. It's that simple. Why are we here? That's it. To know, love, and serve God, and thereby gain heaven. Everything else is really just secondary and in service of that. And I think it's good for us to remember that once in a while, because it's so easy to get caught up in things that are secondary, right? Now, knowing, loving, and serving God sounds great, but what exactly does that mean? Well, that comes down to really just three basic areas. The first one is Christ. And I like to call it the Christ event, which means everything that happened from the Annunciation to the Ascension, right? What Jesus did, not just his death, but his life, death, and resurrection, especially his incarnation, is what regenerated human nature. Now, the Protestants, they know that, but for them, that's it, one and done, once saved, always saved. It's not that way for Catholics, which brings me to the second area of meaning of life, and that's the church and the sacraments. Because the sacraments apply the Christ event to us. Right? The Protestants don't have anything to apply the Christ event to them. It just is. But we recognize that Jesus set up a sacramental system by which he would apply those graces, those merits he won for us in his life, death, and resurrection. And those are the sacraments which come from the church. And then finally, it's faith, hope, and love, right? These are the virtues that are most important, which come to us directly from baptism, God himself living in us. Our life in faith, hope, and love is really the key to holiness. So, in a nutshell, that's all that's important in life. That's all that's important in life. Everything else is in function of that. But when you just boil it all down, what really matters, it's the Christ event, the church/sacraments, faith, hope, and love. That's it. Now, what's the specific topic of tonight's conversation? Well, it's one of the sacraments, and it's the most important of the sacraments, because it's the only sacrament that is God himself, and that sacrament is the Eucharist. Quite an appropriate theme, because as some of you know, we're in the midst of a Eucharistic year, a year of renewal. The USCCB has determined that, and a lot of parishes are cooperating. It's not why I picked the theme, but it is appropriate. So I'm going to talk a lot about the Mass, especially tonight. We're going to talk about why it matters. We'll talk about how the Eucharist works philosophically, and then we'll talk about some things that we can do, right? Ways to apply this topic to our lives. So I guess I want to start with the Mass, and I'm going to read to you some things that saints have said about the Mass that are pretty powerful. I'm actually going to begin and end the talk with some saint quotes, but I'm going to give you a few now. So St. John Chrysostom said, "When Mass is being celebrated, the sanctuary is filled with countless angels who adore the divine victim immolated on the altar." St. John Vianney said, he's the cure of ours, "If we really understood the Mass, we would die of joy." If we really understood the Mass, we would die of joy. The same saint said also, "Put all the good works in the world against one holy Mass, and they will be as a grain of sand beside a mountain." This is powerful. We have to take a moment to think about what he just said. He means you might be a Nobel Prize winner and have developed a cure for cancer. And you may have solved world hunger and have done all kinds of great things for the world. But all of that pales in comparison to the value of one Mass. St. Lawrence Justinian said, "No human tongue can enumerate the favors that trace back to the sacrifice of the Mass. The sinner is reconciled with God, the just man becomes more upright, sins are wiped away, vices are uprooted, virtue and merit increase, and the devil's schemes are frustrated. All of that happens in every single Mass. St. Peter Julian Amart said, "Know, O Christian, that the Mass is the holiest act of religion. You cannot do anything to glorify God more, nor profit your soul more, than by devoutly assisting at it and assisting as often as possible." What St. Peter Julian Amart just said is really going to be the essence of my talk tonight. Kiravar, again, says, "When we receive Holy Communion, we experience something extraordinary, a joy, a fragrance, a well-being that thrills the whole body and causes it to exult." And finally, St. Leonard of Port Morris said, "I believe that if it were not for the Holy Mass, as of this moment, the whole world would be in the abyss." So, I think it's clear that the Mass is important, but see, that's something we already know. People have been telling us this for years. The saints throughout the centuries have been telling us. So then the question is, well, why don't we care about it more? Why don't we care about it more? And you know what? We got to be realistic here. I remember when I was a kid, 8, 9, 10 years old, I was bored out of my mind at Mass. And I know all my friends were too. You go to one of these Our Lady of Lourdes Masses, right? And you go to many school Masses, and you're going to see kids who are bored out of their minds and are just talking with their neighbors and fooling around. Because people don't know what's going on at that thing. And sometimes we ourselves don't even fully know what's going on at that thing. Heck, St. John Vianney said that even he didn't fully know what was going on, and this is someone who really appreciates the Mass. My goal tonight, right, again, this is preaching to the choir for some, but it's new for others, is to make sure that we all get to Mass more and get more out of it. Now, I am going to be talking about a lot of things. I don't think I'll take longer than 12 minutes, 15. But the stuff I'm talking about tonight is extremely important. Not because I said it, but because the Church has said it, and Christ has said it through the Church. All right, so what are some things people don't like about Mass? Well, I know some things I don't like. Sometimes the music's bad, and you just hate those tunes, right? Sometimes the homily's really bad, and you just want it to end. Sometimes you just hate that side of peace because you're at a place where they're doing the rotating fan approach. And they gotta just turn that whole body, and you're like, please, we're building up to something. We've had the consecration, we're about to receive communion. Why do I need the human rotating fan? And so if we're honest with ourselves, there are a lot of annoying things about Mass, right? But see, the point of tonight is that this shouldn't detract at all from our appreciation of the Mass, because those are all just secondary things. If the priest at whatever church it is, even the happy, slappy guitar Mass, if that priest is a real priest, and he's saying the actual words of the rite, then that Mass is just as valuable as any other Mass that's ever been celebrated in the history of the world. I think that's something we all need to remember, and not just us, but tell our kids that, tell our friends that, right? Our friends who say, well, Mass is so boring, why should it go? Well, they actually don't understand the Mass. I'm going to talk about that now. So Chris and I, we both teach at a very Catholic school. It's a great place to be. We have wonderful colleagues, okay? And the way that our school does it is that we have Mass for our students every Friday. That's actually important for us, is to give Mass to the student body. So every Friday, whole school, grades 1 through 12 are there. Now, Chris and I are both homeroom teachers, which means we have a group of kids to watch, and we always go. For years before I became a homeroom teacher, I always went anyway. But here's the thing that makes me a little sad. Even though every single one of our faculty members is a practicing Catholic, every single one, there's a good handful, more than a handful, who don't go to that Friday Mass. And why don't they go? They're not bad people. On the contrary, they're good people. But they have more productive things to do. Productive things to do. See, this is the devil who talks to us workaholic Americans all the time, that there's more important stuff to do than Mass. We've all fallen into this. I've fallen into it before, right? And so the reason this talk is important is because I'm hoping that after, we're all going to do our best to even go to daily Mass. How is that possible? Well, you know what? It is. It just has to be important enough to you to make it happen. All right, now, before I get to that, though, we need to talk about some tech or some conceptual stuff, all right? And the reason for this is it's kind of like physics. I teach physics. You can't do physics without math, because even though physics isn't math, math is the language of physics, right? The same is true in theology and apologetics. The language of theology is philosophy. And if you don't have some of those terms clear, then you're never going to understand some of the basic theology. Now, we're here because we want more than a second grader's faith. A second grader's faith says, yep, Jesus in the Eucharist, great. We are here because we love God so much that that doesn't cut it for us anymore. We love God, so we want to know more. The more we know, the more we love. And the more we love, the more we want to know. And it's a beautiful, virtuous cycle. And so I'm going to just take a really few minutes to explain the philosophy behind the Eucharist. All right? The philosophy behind the Eucharist. So bear with me just for a few minutes. All I'm about to say comes straight from Aristotle, Aquinas. If you want to read about it in the Summa, it's questions 75 through 77. You can find the Summa online. All right, but it all comes down to substance and accident. Now, the reason I need to find these terms is because you just hear accidents, you think, oh, car accidents. No, substance and accidents, something Aristotle came up with that Aquinas later adopted and the church has adopted. Substance is what something is, okay? So this table is a substance. Okay? Now, the accidents are the changeable qualities of the thing, or the changeable attributes of the thing. So this substance has a certain quantity, a weight, an amount of mass. I could shave a little bit off, sand a little bit off, reducing its quantity, but it's still the same substance. It's got a place, right now it's here, now it's there, change of place, same substance. Okay, so Aristotle said that you've got a substance that has accidents. The accidents change, the substance remains. That's the basic difference between the two. Okay. Now, what happens in the Eucharist? In the Eucharist, what you have is you have a piece of bread. All right. I'm just going to hold something as a demo of that. And I don't have a round piece, but you'll have to pretend it's round. Okay, so in the Eucharist, you've got a piece of bread. And that's all it is. It's just bread. But Jesus taught us in John 6 and in the Last Supper narrative that in the words of consecration, it becomes something more. Now, here's a stumbling block for would-be believers or weak believers. They look at that and they say, that is just stupid. Right? That's like calling the cart a person. Are you kidding me? Is that a body? See, this is where substance and accidents comes in. All right? Because normally what happens is I can change the accidents of something, and yet the substance remains the same. With the Eucharist, the accidents remain the same, but the substance changes. Okay? And that substance is actually the substance of Jesus Christ. Where is Jesus Christ? Well, he's in heaven. He is physically present in heaven. With the consecrated host, he is not physically present. He is substantially present. This is key. This is extremely important. Okay? The accidents of bread are still there. The substance underlying those accidents is Jesus. Where are Jesus' physical accidents? They're in heaven. His physical accidents remain in heaven, but his substance is in both heaven and the host. It is the same Jesus. If you have the host, I have the host, everyone has the host, it's still the same Jesus. Substantially present in every host, but his physical accidents are elsewhere. And so what's left? Well, what's left are the accidents of the host, which no longer have an underlying subject. But those accidents, floating as it were, both hide and indicate the substantial presence of Jesus. All right, what do I mean by hide and indicate? Okay, I want you to think of the analogy of a bright white cloud, and it's the late afternoon sun. It's a lone cloud in a blue sky, right? And behind that cloud is the sun. Okay, so you can't see the sun behind the cloud directly, but you know it's there because it's shining through and around, which means you know the sun is there, all right? In other words, that light shining through the cloud and around it indicate the presence of the sun, and yet the cloud hides the physical accidents of the sun. Okay, let's extend the analogy. With the host, the accidents of the bread that used to belong to bread but now are just floating there hide the presence of Jesus, whose physical accidents are in heaven, and yet because the accidents are still there, they indicate the presence of the Son, S-O-N, who's behind the host in disguise, and that we can see through the light of faith. This is how the Eucharist works. This is how the Eucharist works. The Eucharist is a space-time bridge. Okay? Anyone ever heard of wormholes? All right, wormholes are theoretical physics. They haven't been found yet, but have you ever seen Interstellar? Interstellar is how they actually change from one galaxy to another. They go through a wormhole. A wormhole is a space-time bridge. It's where two remotely distant places suddenly become the same place. All right. Another thing that's fictional is space foldings from Dune, science fiction. Right. Anyone ever heard of Dune? Seen the movie? Watched the book? Or at least heard of? Okay. You don't need to, because in Dune, their way of traveling interstellarly is folding space. Now, what folding space means is you've got distant galaxy A, distant galaxy B, suddenly they're in the same place. Right? That's science fiction. But that happens in every transubstantiation. Is we get transported to where Jesus is and he comes to us. Our places match and our times match. That's pretty mind-blowing, okay? And that's all because of the substance and accidents things that I just explained, okay? Now, everything I just said is about the Eucharist, but we still need to talk about what that has to do with the Mass, all right? And I'm gonna talk about that next. And I think the best way to do it is to read from one of my favorite archbishops ever, Joseph Naumann. How many have heard that guy? Joseph Naumann. And maybe I like him because the last four letters of his last name match mine. Maybe I like him because his first name is also my first name. No, actually I like him because he is a solid bishop who does not pull punches. He's not a namby-pamby bishop. He is a strong bishop who's not afraid to call politicians out. Such as Kathleen Sebelius, he denied her communion. Few people know this. She was part of his diocese. He denied her communion for her position on abortion. So anyway, I like this bishop a lot. He's currently the head of the pro-life committee of the USCCB. This is what he says. Listen to what he says on the Mass, and then I'll explain a little bit. If someone offered us a free trip to the Holy Land, giving us the opportunity to visit the places of our Lord's passion and death, I think most of us would eagerly accept it. Or better still, if someone with a time machine offered to take us back to be present for the Last Supper, we would be thrilled for such an opportunity. Wouldn't that be great, to time travel and actually be there at the foot of the cross? The bishop says, this is offered to us at each and every Mass. This is offered to us at each and every Mass. Every Eucharist, every liturgy, gives us something even more than a free trip to the Holy Land. The Mass places us in the upper room of the Last Supper and at the foot of the cross on Calvary. That is so profound, I'm going to read it again. The Mass places us in the upper room of the Last Supper and at the foot of the cross on Calvary. How is that possible? Because when the host is consecrated, all right, hiding and indicating the substantial presence of Jesus, the Jesus that it's hiding is the Last Supper Jesus. Being at Mass is being at the cenacle. Every time the host is consecrated, I remember that. And I pretend I'm there. I am there. We are all there. But I see it in my mind's eye to recall that I am at the cenacle. I am at the Last Supper. How is that possible? Because God, or Jesus as man, is limited to one time and place, but Jesus as God can be in many times, many places. thanks to the space-time bridge, which is the Eucharist. Then when the blood is consecrated, you now have separation of body and blood. Where are you? You are at the foot of the cross. You are at the foot of the cross. You are witnessing the blood dripping from the crucified body of Jesus at every Mass. At every Mass. That's the time machine. But no, it's better than that. It's actually being there. You guys have probably heard that it's in the Catechism. The Mass is the representation of the sacrifice of Calvary. But representation doesn't just mean we are representing it, we're doing some kind of reenactment. No, representation means that it is the sacrifice. It is making it present, meaning it's the same sacrifice. It's the bloody sacrifice of Christ, present in an unbloody manner sacramentally, but it's still the same sacrifice. If we really think about that, doesn't that just blow your mind? That every single Mass, you get to go to the foot of the cross. Not symbolically, but you are actually there at the foot of the cross. I don't think our minds can quite grasp it, and yet that's the truth that we believe. So we need to start living it. We need to start living it. That brings me to my last section, right? So I'm trying not to go over time, and that is, how do we need to change? Again, I'm preaching to the choir in some ways, but not 100% either. Because I know for myself that even if you had talked to me 8 months ago, I would have agreed with everything that I'm currently saying. But 8 months ago, I didn't quite have the same appreciation for it. And I'm going to tell you what changed my whole view 8 months ago. A single quote from Padre Pio. A single quote from Padre Pio, which I will now read. I read it and I was floored. Changed my life. I'm never going to be the same. Listen to what he said. He said, if we only knew how God regards this sacrifice, we would risk our lives to be present at a single Mass. If we only knew how God regards this sacrifice, we would risk our lives to be present at a single Mass. Let's unpack that a little bit. People risk their lives for all kinds of things. How many are familiar with that show, Squid Games? I haven't seen it, but I've heard the premise. My boys have watched it. These are people risking their lives to get out of debt. Because if you win, you win a lot of money, but of course, most of them die. Because it's a risky game. And that's just to get out of debt. Padre Pio is saying here that the value of the Mass is such that if we could only go to one in our entire life, only one, that would be worth risking everything for. When I read that and really reflected on it, I could not be the same. And I will tell you, in the last 8 months, I've gone to Mass every day that I possibly could. The only days I haven't is when I just couldn't, because there's once in a while you can't. But all the other times, I don't care how busy I was, I'll go. Because Padre Pio's words just ring in my ear. I can't get away from them. I've got to go. I've got to go every day. I've got an analogy for you. Imagine that at 7-Eleven, they were saying, all right, if you come at 7 a.m. and you come again at 11 p.m., we will give you $30,000 each time. Tax-free. Well, you bet your life that I would go to that 7-Eleven twice a day. But guys, the Mass is way better than that. Because at 7-Eleven, I might be getting out $30,000, but at the Mass, I'm getting God Himself. What on earth could be better than that? What on earth could be more worth our time than doing that? There's nothing. Now, again, once in a while, there are things that you just can't get out of. I know that. We all have responsibilities. But to make the time, even though it's going to maybe, in your mind, have you getting less work done or getting behind on something, it's always more than worth it. It's always more than worth it. So what am I telling you guys? Go to daily Mass. You can do it. Maybe not every day, right? I understand that. But you can probably go a lot more than you're going. Now, some of you probably already do. I think you were talking about your parents, and they do. That's great. But if you're not in that category yet, and you've been going every Sunday, which is also good, then go twice a week. And then when you got that down, go 3 times a week. And when you got that down, go 5 times a week. And then go all the way. Because I'm telling you? Heck no. Because Jesus is telling you. Jesus is telling you, I want you to come and receive me. He's telling us all this, and I want you to do it every day. And why don't we go? Boring, bad music, it's going to take my time. I've got more productive things to do. I've got appointments. I've got people to see, places to go. Yes, but none of that matters as much as the Mass. You guys see what I'm saying? None of that matters as much as the Mass. Need to wake up early? Wake up early. Need to go late? Go late. You find a way. You find a way. I'll share with you just personally what I do. Sometimes if it's the only thing I can do, I go to 6:15 at St. Vitus. I don't like it. Priest's back is turned to me, right? That's fine. Trinity Mass, not my style, but I go because it's the Mass. When I can't make that or that time doesn't work, well then I'll just skip out of school, travel to St. Philip's, go to 12:05 Mass, and get my butt back to school. I could be grading papers, but Mass is more important. And when I can't even do that, well then after dinner I'll go to St. Rosa. They have a 7 p.m. Spanish Mass. St. Ferdinand in San Fernando has. My point is, there's almost always a way. And even though you don't like Mass because it's boring, don't let that distract you from what Mass actually is. The most important thing you can possibly do in your life. And I'm going to say that one more time. The Mass is the most important thing you could possibly do in your life.